All right, in this video, we're going to see how we can start to make a simple galaxy or nebula. Now, there's definitely plenty of room for improvement with these techniques, so at some point I may make a version 2 video that goes over those. But when I first saw Pyro, when they released it in Cinema 4D 2023.1, this was one of the first things that I really wanted to try and make. And so it took me a while to get something that I was pretty happy with. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here's the end result here. And I'll take you through creating this, as well as kind of show you where you could, take it in whatever direction you would like, make it more like a nebula, whatever the case may be. So let's start from scratch here and get rid of the picture viewer. And we're going to start by creating a helix. This will be what we use to create both the pyro parts of this as well as the stars themselves. So I'm going to switch the plane here, really look through, say, a top view for this, and start by adjusting either the start or end radius here to get something like that, and probably reduce this end angle a little bit, maybe something like 400 or so. And then take the height to 0. We essentially have one arm of our spiral galaxy. I can put this into a cloner and then switch the mode here to radial. Going to reduce the radius to 0, and now you can see that we have our basic galaxy. You can adjust the count. I still think I want to bring down that end angle a little bit more, maybe something like that. And let's see, end radius could maybe be a little bit larger. And like I said, you can play with this as much or as little as you want. Maybe we'll just add one more and call that a day. I'll also go ahead and scale this up just a bit as well. Because I do think, trying to work in something of a larger scale, because this is a galaxy, would definitely help compositionally when, adding a camera or trying to do an animation with this. So the first thing we're going to do here is create our pyro parts of this. And we're just going to be creating clouds. And we're going to do this in two different parts. We're going to create kind of a wispy, further out part of clouds that are more see-through, and then a smaller part of pyro that's a little bit closer to it. So we're going to start with the inner portion. I'll add a pyro tag to my cloner here. And in the pyro settings, before we do that, let's go to the project settings in simulation, into scene, and set the gravity to 0. Okay. And then to help give us a little bit more activity here, because if we were to play this, we get something very kind of generic. We're also going to want to go under simulate and forces and choose turbulence and raise the strength on this up. Okay. We also want to go into our pyro tag here and uncheck temperature, because we really just need density. Okay. And so we can hit play now. We can see that we should start to see, our clouds or the inner part of the galaxy start to take shape. And that's looking pretty good. You could lower the voxel size a bit, depending on the specs of your computer and how detailed you want to make this. So maybe we'll go with something like 3. The other thing we can do to make this a little bit smaller, okay, so depending on how small we want to go with this, would be to, in our pyro tag, change the surface thickness here. So the smaller you make this, kind of the smaller it will make these clouds overall. But I think that's actually going to work pretty good here. And now it's just a matter of kind of playing this through till we find a frame we like. And I'll go maybe towards the end of my timeline here at around closer to frame 90. That looks pretty good. I also want to make sure in my pyro object, in the pyro section, the object section, we switch density to on and then turn off everything else. And in fact, it's probably not a bad idea just to rewind and play this again, just to make sure it's actually creating the geometry. We're not creating the other properties that we don't need. So that way, when we turn this into a VDB here shortly, we get just what we want. All right, let's double check the turbulence. Okay, I did turn the strength up on that. So that's good. And you could go a little bit higher with that if you wanted to adjust the frequency. if you weren't happy with the way this is looking. But I'm pretty happy with this. So what I will do is pause it and then right click on our Pyro and do current state to object. And what that's going to do is create a VDB, essentially a non-animated version of this that we can now work with. And so we'll call this inner gas. And now I want to make the outer gas. So I'll hide that. And the outer gas is going to happen. We're going to need to make a couple of other changes to our properties here in our Pyro tag. We're going to set add density down to 0 and set density here to just 10. So that way it's the same amount of smoke dissipating over time. In our Pyro object, we're going to go to Pyro, and we want to do a few things in here. Probably should raise the voxel size, but we'll see if we can't leave it. In the dissipation section, we're going to want to take the density dissipation down to 0. So that way our smoke doesn't completely dissipate. I'm going to set this to, say, 300. And remember that surface thickness, I may want to increase this a little bit so that we start with something a little bit thicker. All right, so this dissipates. And once again, depending on your computer, you may start to run into some issues doing this. I probably should have increased the voxel size, so why don't we do that just to make sure we don't get any of those fun out of memory errors. And for anybody curious, I am running this on a 3090, so I still run into quite a few issues when I use Pyro on that, and that has about 24 gigabytes of RAM. But as you can see here, we're creating something larger. This is going to be kind of our softer outer area of dust in our galaxy. This is probably also what I would use to create a nebula as well. And you could do a few of these, maybe use different shapes, different thicknesses like we set in the Pyro tag here. So you would have a few different options to work with when it comes to creating different densities of dust in smoke, different colors, all of that good stuff. So this is looking pretty good to me. All right, so it's just something thicker. All right, could maybe have gone a little bit further till this starts to blend together, but this will work. And what we'll do is right click on our Pyro once again and choose current state to object once again. And so we'll call this outer gas. From here, I will just disable the Pyro, make sure I turn it off so we can see it. And now we can start working with the lighting here. And we have the outer gas visible. So what we'll do is create 2 Pyro materials. So actually, let's switch the renderer to Redshift. That will help. And then I can come through here and choose materials, Pyro volume. Duplicate that. This will be outer. This will be inner. Oops. That's right. You can't just arrow to go to the next object. So we'll apply these, which means once I add a dome light, even with nothing in it yet, we should start to see this. And there we go. Now lighting is a little bit tricky here. I'm fortunate enough to have the Grayscale plugins, which has some star-based HDRIs, so that's what I'll be using. But you'll see I kind of do this in 2 different parts here, one for the actual lighting, one for the background. So let's call this lighting, and the next one we create will be for our background, but I'll drag that into there so I can open up the library and just go to space here and choose, really whatever you want. So I'm going to go with maybe something like, actually, we'll go with Space Nebula D here. We should see that load in at some point, if this is working. And there we go. And you can see just how dark our nebula is now. And that's why I end up using 2 separate HDRIs for this. I'm going to take the exposure value on this first one and really crank it up till I start to see some lighting. And I'm not terribly concerned with how the background looks at this moment. So maybe we only need to go something like 4, maybe 6, just to brighten this up a little bit. And once I'm done with this one, I will uncheck background and then duplicate it, call this one background. and make sure I check background back on here and just reset it to its kind of original exposure value. So that way we're getting the best of both. Now, we are getting a lot of blue light here on our HDRI. If we do want to adjust that a bit, we could always adjust the saturation. That way we get a little bit more color from the stars in the Pyro material we're about to use here. Okay, so speaking of that, let's get this going. And the biggest thing I want to do with this one is make it a lot thinner. I want to be able to see through this. And the way to do that is to significantly lower the scatter coefficient and the absorption coefficient. So I'm going to try like 0.01 here. Okay, so that will make it darker. Really takes a combination here. We're starting to maybe see through it a little bit. So let's do this again. 0.001. And that actually looks pretty good. But you can see how we could take this even, perhaps even a bit lower. Can we go even lower? Let's try that. So yes, we can. And that's probably too low. So let's split the difference here and just do 0.005. Now these values could be different depending on the scale of your scene, the lighting you use, how bright that lighting is. Since we're talking about light and what happens as it passes through our smoke here. So just to show you, if I take this, say 10, notice how much brighter this gets now, how less transparent it is. So that is a big part of what we're seeing here. Now, in terms of color, we could leave this alone. We may want to actually, just because we have that inner part and we're getting a lot of color from the HDRI. But if you want to add color, we're going to be doing this a few times. We can just load colors into the density ramp here, or actually the scatter property of this material that is using the density channel. So I can hit load preset, and these are all kind of cool colors. So maybe I'll just go with, say, Flame 06. And you can see how that gave us a lot of blue. And what I'm going to do is get rid of these darker colors on the ends here, because we don't really want those so much. You can see how that's looking. Maybe even want to right click here and just go distribute knots to get something a little bit even. And the way this works is kind of like an outer to inner color here. So we could just as easily invert this and we'd get something that gets darker on the outside, brighter to the inside, or at least go from purple to blue as we get from outside to inside. But I think that looks pretty good. Maybe even get rid of that last blue one so things get a little bit bright. That may be a bit too much. So I'll undo that, keep that. I can always go back and adjust this density down if I want to, but I think that is looking pretty good. And now we can do something similar with our inner. Let's make sure that is turned on. Actually, don't need to get too crazy there. You can see we're already getting some color with this. And I may want to adjust the scatter coefficient and absorption here as well. So maybe something like 0.01 will work with this since it's smaller. Okay. Probably even lower. Let's try 0.01. I don't necessarily want this to be as see-through, but you can see what we end up with. So that's looking okay. Still a bit too regular for me. I wish I had maybe pushed that a bit further, but I think we can make it work, especially when we load in a color. I could use the same color here. Maybe we kind of change things up a little bit, introduce some warmer colors into this one a little bit. Let's just try distribute knots again. Actually should have gotten rid of some of these other ones that I don't maybe want. And we can just try distribute again. So, okay, that's looking pretty good. Really not a fan of that, that harsh kind of line we have there. So I may want to try and figure out what exactly is causing that. Let's see. Could just be our two volumes intersecting, perhaps. Could just be our original, our cloner, since. So nope, still there. Something to do with our inner gas and perhaps the colors we're using. So let's see what we can do. Opening up that gradient again. Oh, let's try something a little bit different and see if we still get it. Okay, definitely do, which is a bit unfortunate, but I think we'll just kind of keep moving on with that, except not those colors. Let's try something else. What else could we do? Maybe flame 4. Let's try inverting this and see if that doesn't help. I don't mind the colors on this. I like this a little bit better, even though I'm not maybe getting quite the getting rid of that inner part like I was hoping to, but that actually looks kind of cool. So we can keep that. Let's just distribute this. And just for fun, oh, I think I clicked invert. So let's invert that back. Well, that kind of helped a little. So there we go. All right. So we have the gas part of this done. Now we have to do our stars. And what we can do is reuse this cloner. But first, we're going to create a sphere and maybe make it, say, 3 centimeters big. We may make this smaller, but that's at least a good start for us to see visually what we're working with. And I'm going to turn off my gas as I set these up. So sphere, going to put it in a cloner. Switch the mode here to object. And we're going to use our previous cloner that has our helix in it. And we're going to increase the count here to something kind of high, like say 1,000. We can now see that. In fact, we can actually just stop rendering as well. Turn off that stuff. There we go. And name that stars. Group all this stuff together since we don't need it. All right. And with our stars, we're going to add a random effector. In fact, we'll use a couple of them. This one's going to be random position. Okay. And the reason we're going to end up using 2 of them is so we can have different minimum and maximum values here. Because for the position, I like what I'm seeing. I think that looks pretty good. I should probably just double check it with my gas though, right? So maybe we can push that a little bit further, although it is transparent, so that might work, but we'll keep that as is for right now. And then I'm going to come here and choose random again, and this will be my random scale, so that these have a randomized scale, which we'll set up by unchecking position, turning on scale, checking on uniform scale, and setting this to -1. Now, I kind of went a bit fast over this, but I created these random effectors with the cloner selected, and that's why at least the position one got applied. The scale one did not. And so if you don't have your Mograph generator selected like the cloner, what you can do is just drag and drop it in there, and that should apply it as well. I'm going to select my random scale here. I like this -1, but I want to change the minimum so it's really only scaling things down, randomizing the size from 0 down to -100. And I can still see these look quite large. So that's where we come down here and maybe set this down to like 1.5, maybe even 1. But that's why we create so many of them. Now, what I want to do in really either one of these random effectors is come here to parameter and change color mode to effector color. And that is going to, if we close this, give our stars some random colors, which is great. Looks pretty good. You can check use alpha, use strength here if you want. Adjust the blending mode. And I do actually almost like doing this with fields a little bit better because I feel like you have just a little bit more options when it comes to color, which can help for this next step, which is to use this color in a material. Okay, we're going to create not a regular material, but an incandescent material. And this is going to give our stars the ability to put off a little bit more light. In that way, we start to get a little bit more color on the gas, the dust, the smoke, if you will, as well. So we're going to grab our Mograph colors and tell it to use it in our materials by using the color user data. Okay. node, and we're going to plug that into the illumination color. Okay. And even right now, if I was to render this, we would start to see those colors if I was to, there we go, apply this. Oh, and they went away. And I believe that's because we need to increase the intensity multiplier. So let's try setting this to 100. Okay, I wouldn't have expected it to take that long to render, so I'm wondering what could be the cause here. Oh, I know what's the problem. I did not assign the attribute in our color user data. So with the color user data node selected, we want to choose presets. And I know this is a little bit cut off, so I apologize. Mograph, and this is all the way cut off, but you want to choose the color option. And once I've done that, I can see the colors change back in my perspective view, which should be a good sign for when we render. And there we go. Now, we're losing a lot of that color. And I think some of that to blame is because we've added our intensity multiplier. We've increased that so much. If you lower that down to say 10 or 1, you may start to see some of those colors come back. We could also try turning on apply camera exposure compensation. That can help with these colors as well. Okay, but I'm actually not going to do that. Instead, what I will do, and what I found is a way to get the colors to look a little bit better here, is to use a ramp and essentially remap these colors. So I'm going to choose ramp. All I need to do is drag and drop this onto that connection there. And that should change our colors. And once again, we can just load a preset in here. So if I like that flame 6 again, I can use that. All right, we can see we got a lot of those blues now. Once again, I'm going to take some of those darker colors off the end because we don't want those. Distribute. And I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more of some orange or yellows in there. And it looks like we're seeing a lot of this left-hand side of our gradient. So what we can do is if we hold down select shift when we select these, see we can scale them inwards until we're happy with the colors we're getting. So I'm not seeing mine update maybe quite as much as I would like. There we go. We're starting to get a little bit more, but if we want to add any colors, now's the time to do so. So I will actually do that by just clicking inside here and really just getting crazy with our gradient, setting this to say like a red, this to say a yellow, just so we get some other warm kind of colors in there. So now I'll select multiple of these again. And since I added the red and yellow towards the left-hand side because that's where a lot of our colors are coming from anyway, so let's just get a little bit more of them in there. This may take a second to update so we can see what that looks like. It looks like it's doing an okay job. Okay, there it is. We kind of keep messing with this until we're happy with it. I'm going to call this good for right now, though I still wish I did have some warmer colors. Maybe could have even used a warmer gradient to counteract the cooler colors of our gas. But once again, that's where a lot of the kind of customization comes in, and you can do whatever you want with it. So we can turn all of our dust and smoke back on. I'm looking at this now going, these spheres are still way too big. So I'm going to set this much lower to say something like 0.5 and see what we get with that. Okay, so that size-wise is looking a lot better. And overall, I think that's looking pretty good. The only thing I'm still not happy with is the fact we can see that inner part of that smaller gas. In fact, if I'm not happy with it, I could, turn it off completely and just work with the thickness in the density of our outer one. So let's see. That too, did I take it down a little bit instead of up? That may have been what just happened there. So let's see what we get with that. So yeah, even that's looking good. I would definitely want to do more with the colors here, but who knows? Maybe turning on the intergas now will make things look a little bit better. Maybe we won't see that line as much, but ultimately, that is the technique I've come up with. And like I said, well, I do think there's plenty of time or plenty of ways to refine this, make it better. It's by no means perfect. I think this is a really good start. And even just looking at this in my render view here, where what's the scale? Okay, it is at 100%. I think this is looking pretty darn good, especially if we were to zoom out a bit. So that will do it for this video. If there's anything else you would like to see, please let me know. And until next time, take care.